So again, welcome to Fixin to Lead. This is the first time that we've done an event like this, and this is really for people that are thinking about taking the next step in leadership, whether that's in your community, in your job, if you're thinking of running for office or seeking an appointed office. It's kind of the questions that you need to ask yourself to get yourself prepared and be ready to take the next step. And good thing is we have training for candidates that are interested in running as well as seeking appointed office later next year. So we do have the next follow-on step for you after this training. And we also want to just sort of lay the groundwork that this is a workshop, but that we don't intend for you to leave today with all the answers necessarily, but rather to learn the questions you need to ask and to have some tools and make some connections with other women so that you can figure out if you're ready to take the next step and get your ducks in a row, so to speak, for that effort. So I want to thank Duke Energy, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and the Center for American Women in Politics for their support of this event and for their leadership in promoting diversity and gender parity in our governing bodies. We couldn't do this without them. And just really quickly, for those of you that are new to South Carolina Women in Leadership, we are a multi-partisan group of women working together to move our state forward by informing, inspiring, and involving women in leadership on public appointed boards and commissions, in elected office, and in leadership roles in the community. And there are hundreds, maybe thousands of vacant seats across the state on appointed boards and commissions. 2023 will not have a lot of offices up for election. But in 2024, it's going to be a big year, and we are looking to triple the number of women that are seeking appointed office and running for elected office by 2024. So we've got our work cut out for us, but that's where you guys are going to come in. So again, I will lead you through today, just a little bit of housekeeping. We have a lot of ground to cover in the short amount of time that we have today. So please feel free to take care of yourself as needed throughout the sessions and during the discussion time. We aren't going to take any formal breaks, but you're welcome to get up and use the restroom, help yourself to refreshments and coffee and those sorts of things all throughout the day as you need to. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get us into our first presentation. We are really excited to have Tamika Isaac Devine with us this morning. Unfortunately, her co-presenter, Jen Houlihan, who is a councilwoman with the city of Simpsonville, has been very ill and is not going to be able to join us today, but Tamika has a wealth of knowledge to share. So Tamika is an attorney, she's a speaker, and she's also a former member of the City of Columbia City Council. So we're so pleased to have her here. If she would like to introduce, a little bit more about her background, I'm going to let her do that and then launch right into From Fear to Focus. So many of you may feel like you're underqualified for a leadership role. And this is where we want you to challenge those fears. Think about, what you can do, what you have control over to get yourself ready and get to the next level. So Tamika, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm remote as well. I'm actually at a college visit with my daughter, and so I am excited to be able to be with you first thing in the morning before I head out and go to what I call my home by the sea. I went to Hampton University here in Virginia. So thus this is why I picked this as a school. This is the view that we have over here. So it's wonderful. But I'm excited to be here with you guys because I am a board member of South Carolina Women in Leadership, but even without that position, I've always been a big proponent of we need more women in office. Women, we just lead differently. I tell people all the time, I'm not saying we necessarily lead better than men, but I actually do think we lead better than men. But even without that, we lead differently. We bring solutions to the table. We lead with our life experiences that are so necessary. And so I'm excited that you all have signed up for this presentation and that you are, at least for you being here, you're at least considering running for an office or seeking an appointment to an office. And so I want to first congratulate you for doing that. Just a little bit more about myself. As Sarah mentioned, I am a former member of Columbia, South Carolina City Council. I first ran for office. I decided to run when I was 28 years old and was first elected and sworn in at 29. And I served 20 years on City Council. I just left City Council in January of this year. Last year, I ran for mayor of the city of Columbia. And if elected, I would have been the first female mayor we've ever had here in the city. And I tell people that that election taught me a whole lot about women in leadership and, even more struggles that we have now than we had when I first ran, but also gave me a lot of inspiration about what is needed for women to continue to go up in our elected and appointed office. And so I'll share a little bit about that story as well. But when I first ran for office, I hear a lot of women talk about when I'm on panels or I look at the studies and other things. I hear a lot of women say, women don't usually run unless, someone asks them to run. So I'm gonna tell you that I'm the novel to that. No one asked me to run the very first time I ran. Actually, most people, even people within my circles, tried to dissuade me from running. I challenged an incumbent to run. I felt like there was a voice necessary on city council that was not there. There were no African-American females on city council. There was no one under the age of 50 for city council. But as someone who is actually about to turn 50 in about 30 days, I don't think 50 is that old anymore, but back then I thought it was pretty old. And so I knew we needed a diversity on our council. And so I decided to run for council. I did my homework first. I went to city council meetings. I researched what they did, the issues before the city. So I made sure I was really prepared so that when you might get that fear or those people in your mind, in your ear saying, oh, are you qualified? Or, maybe you shouldn't do this, or maybe you should start for a smaller office. I didn't let any of that noise get in my mind. But so I wasn't one that someone asked to run. I was someone who knew that and saw a need in my community. And I knew that I had a lot of value to add. And after serving for 20 years, I still look at my tenure on city council with a lot of pride and satisfaction, because there were a lot of things that got implemented within the city and nationally that would not have happened without my voice being at certain tables. And so I'm excited that you guys are here, because I think it's really important that we do shift from fear to focus. A lot of times there is a sense of intrepidation when you're looking at an office, especially now in where we are in this country with the vitriol of politics. I have a lot of friends who have chosen not to run, that were elected and have chosen to not seek election again because of what's going on in our country. But one of the things that South Carolina Women in Leadership, one of our priorities is reducing the polarization in government. And I think that the way we do that is we get more good women elected in all the parties to be in office, because we know that women, we lead better, we lead differently. And when we come to the table, we certainly will be able to bring different things. So let me just share a little bit about kind of what I wanted to share on fear to focus. Like I said, when I was 28, I decided to run. Some people might say it was because I was young, because I was naive. I really wasn't scared. I looked at it in a way that, what's the worst thing that can happen? I run for office, I don't get elected, but I gain a very valuable experience. And I really truly believe that. I was successful in my very first campaign. I won by less than 200 votes, which is a testament that every single election matters. Every single vote counts. And so I was really excited about that. But I also know that through that election, I gained some very valuable friends, very valuable experiences, and learned lessons. But then after serving 20 years, I knew that I had a lot more to give to my city, the city that I love so much. And so I decided last year to run for mayor of the city of Columbia. When I chose to run for mayor, even though I had 20 years of experience, I'm gonna be honest, there were folks who were like, well, is she ready? Does she have what it takes? And I'll tell you, it's funny because men don't get the same things that we do as women. And this is no shade on anybody that ran, but I'll tell you, in my election, it was myself and three men. I had the most experience of all three of them. One of the folks that ran had never served in elected office and before. And, I can't say what people said to him directly, but in the community, it wasn't about, oh, he's not qualified, he's never run for office. It was like, oh, we need a young, fresh perspective. But women, we were like, okay, I've not run for office before. I've not served before. Am I really qualified to run for this office? And so I want to tell you guys that there's always going to be reasons that people give you why you shouldn't run for office. Let me give you one reason why you should. Because we are the most qualified, we bring the most solutions to the table, we bring life experiences that are necessary, we lead with empathy, we lead with a lot of qualifications and narratives that people can't get from books and study. But the other thing is we need more women in office. And so if you are fearful, then I think you need to take your fears. And I know Sarah's mentioned y'all will have some workshops or worksheets that will talk to you about identifying your fears and moving forward from those things. But I think you need to take that fear and focus on what is it that you have to bring to the table. As a speaker and a leadership mentor, a lot of times I'll hear from women, and one of the reasons that some more women don't run for office is because, they have families and they feel like they have to, wait till their children get older. And that's one of the biggest things that when I do my trainings and speakings, I advocate for more women in leadership, especially moms, because we bring a lot of great solutions to the table. And I tell people the reason that some people say they won't run because they're a mom, I think that I turn that around. That's the reason that I feel like we should run. I tell my children, especially my daughters, that they can do or be anything that they say that they want to. But what I show them, if I choose to shrink and not go after running for office or, be elected mayor or anything like that, is because I'm showing them that, well, no, you really can't, or at least not right now. So I think we need to realize that what sometimes is fearful for us actually should be turned into our motivating factor. So I know a lot of women fear about raising money. We will raise money for our churches and our kids' schools and, community organizations. But then when it comes to running for office, we don't want to ask people for money and we feel like we can't raise money. And I will be honest with you, that is a challenge women have across this country in raising the same level of money that men do. But it can happen and it's doable. In my mayoral race, I raised over $500,000. That was more money than I'd ever raised in any of my city council races. But it is because I turned that fear of asking people for money into a focus on money is necessary to communicate what I need to. And so I was laser focused on, if I'm going to get my message across, which I knew was a good message, I needed the money to do that. And so I use that more as a motivating factor than a fear factor. And so there could be a fear of, well, if I run for office, am I going to be, ridiculed, or am I going to be attacked? And a lot of women, and I mentioned I have several friends who were serving and they have chosen not to run for office anymore because of the toll that it took on their families, because people were attacking them personally or saying different things. And that's a real fear. That's a real fear, especially in today's society. But I also feel like, again, turning that fear into focus. Life is not easy. There will always be people who will hate on you. There will always be people who will, not support your goals and will use certain things against you. But I turn that focus into like, and I'm a Christian woman. I believe very much in that what God has for you is for you. And I also know that, if God has given you he doesn't give us a spirit of fear. And if he has given you something that you want to do, that he's going to make a way as well. And so, but he never said it's going to be easy. And so those attacks and that negativity, I have always talked to my family about it and say, hey, to my kids, this may happen. People may say this about your mom. You may see this on TV, but just know that, as growing up, things in this life are not going to be easy. And hopefully that what you'll see is that, that you can persevere through any kind of negativity that people throw at you. And it's a life lesson for them. And so again, I turn that fear into a motivating factor of this is also something that I can teach my kids. And so the last thing I wanted to say before I answer any questions or anything is about lessons learned. I get a lot of people ask me, and those of you who might be in the Midlands probably saw the mayoral's race and saw how negative it got. I will be honest, through that race, I learned more in that race than I had all my other races combined. I ran successfully 5 times for city council at large, the same constituency, and never had a race like I did in the mayor's race. I lost friends through that race. My family was attacked on TV and other things. I lost business as a lawyer, I lost business in that race. But I will tell you that the lessons learned was that we know that if we want to actually change things for the better in our country, if we want to get more good people in elected and appointed office, we have got to be part of the solutions. And so people will ask me all the time, that was a really tough race. Will you run again? And I know lots of folks who will tell me when they have tough races and are not successful that they're not going to run again. I will say the lesson, I feel like there's a lesson and a blessing in every single thing. And even that last race that I had, the lessons that I learned in the mayor's race were worth it because it has strengthened me. It has made me a lot more resilient. It has taught me about, the strength that I have inside of me. It also taught me about the goodness of people. I mean, I have friends now that I met during that campaign that supported me through thick and thin, and it helped me grow as a leader. And so even now, even though I'm no longer an elected official, I'm still working in the community every single day. I'm, working on different community organizations. I'm volunteering in the community. I've actually just coached a mock trial team and doing other things in the community. And all of those things are things that I learned from being in elected office and are values that I have to continue to strengthen my community. And so we've got to understand that even with every single race is not going to turn out the way we want it to, but even in a loss, you gain. And even in a loss, you learn a lot about how you can continue to make our communities better. And that's why we need more women in these positions, because we are the ones that are changing our communities for the better. We're the ones that are building our communities and making them stronger. And so if we're able to do those things, then we can actually learn even when things don't turn out. And then the last thing I'll say on that is, and even if you don't win the first time you run or the first position you go after and don't get appointed for, that's not the end of the world. I know so many men, and if you look at a lot of folks, even nationally, who lost their first election, second election, I lost my 6th election, but that doesn't mean that Tamika's done with being in office. It just means that this wasn't the time for me to do that position, but it's actually given me the encouragement to keep going. And so if you are fearful about running a race and losing, I want you to know that through that loss, you'll learn a whole lot. And so you should never let that be the determining factor to keep you from going to office. That should always be more of a motivating factor because you will gain a lot from that experience. So Sarah, I want to make sure, I'm right I'm at 9:20. So I wanted to make sure I stop and answer any questions. I think Sarah's going to moderate some stuff. You're going to have a conversation among yourselves as well. But I want to answer any questions before I drop off to see if y'all have any questions either about serving or the running or even just lessons from my last loss that may be beneficial and insightful for you. Sarah, are you there? I'm checking the chat too. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, sorry. I am also at the front desk in Charleston as well, and we just had a participant that joined us. So, Tamika, we're as we're fielding questions from the other locations, Do you hear from women, we talk a lot about fears that are real, but what do you hear from women about fears that may be unfounded? So something that someone is afraid of that's holding them back, that's really just them and and isn't really something that is something that they necessarily need to worry about or that they can very easily find a way to overcome. Is there something that you hear that's common?
Sure. There's three that I think are very, very common. The first and foremost, I think we've all heard it, is that, well, I'm not qualified. And I think that fear is that little me in your head telling you that you've got to be overly prepared for a position. And I will tell you again, men, they don't think that way. I mean, I know, 20 something year olds that have never run for office have only, worked around politics who feel like they're qualified. But we don't. And so that's definitely a fear. If you ever think, well, I've got to have certain number of qualifications. The only qualification that you have to have is a desire to make a difference. If you have that desire to make a difference, then you are qualified to run for office. And when you run, the other things will be there. Now, that doesn't mean that, you don't need to actually prepare yourself, but you're already doing that. Being part of this training is preparing yourself. Talking to political consultants might be preparing yourself. So there are certain things, of course, you can do that put you in a better position. But as long as you have a desire to make a change in your community, you are qualified. The second thing that I always hear, the other fear that I feel like is not thing, is that I have to have some amount of connections or name recognition, or worked in politics before. That fear is not true as well. I mean, I think when I first ran for office, I was not political. I'd never run for office. I don't come from a political family. I didn't have a whole lot of money. But again, I have the desire to change my community. The best campaigns are grassroots campaigns, where you're out and about, meeting people where they are, knocking on doors, shaking hands, going to community meetings. And so you don't have to have like all this name recognition. My very first campaign, like I mentioned, I challenged an incumbent. I had no name recognition, but I won. There are races from last Tuesday that I know people won by less than 200 votes, like I did my very first race, and they had never run for office before, but they actually did the work. So that's the second fear I hear. And then I think the third fear I hear a lot is that you have to have a lot of money. Now, be honest, you do have to have some money. You need to be able to raise money. And that's what I talked about before. Don't be afraid to ask people for money, because you need to have money, but you really don't have to have a lot of money. I mean, I know races where people, outspend somebody 3-1 and they still lose. It's about how effectively you use the money, and you can actually compensate for not having as much money with the hard work and dedication you're going to put in. So don't feel like you have to have a ton of money, and that if you don't have the money, you can't run. You have to be able to try and raise the money. But even if you don't have a ton of money, don't let that keep you from running.
Very good. Tamika, we have a question from one of the locations, and I think you answered it, but I just want to confirm. So do you feel like that, talking to people, that sort of one-on-one direct contact that you just mentioned, is a good way to reach voters when they're dissatisfied with the process? It's harder if people are not tuned in. They're just like, I'm shutting down to this whole thing because it is so ugly, because things have been such a contentious mess and so polarized the last few years. Do you think that that one-on-one kind of contact that you just mentioned is what really can make the difference with those voters?
Absolutely. And so I will tell you, you have to be very honest about, not demographics, the geographics of what you're running for. So certainly if you're running for a statewide office or a Congress, you're not going to be able to personally touch every single person there. But it doesn't mean that you don't try. And so I think you got to be honest about that. But yes, personal touches mean a whole lot. And I think that's also how we kind of break down. You see, even in the elections from last week, you'll see 60% of the folks in South Carolina voted like straight party. But there are other people who don't vote straight party. And in order for people to decide they're going to vote for one person or another, might be a personal touch, a personal relationship, or that person spoke to them. So as much as you can speak to people directly is good. I'm a big proponent of of door-to-door personal contacts with people. If you are running in a larger space, so when I ran citywide, there's no way I could knock on 130,000 doors, but I could knock on doors in different neighborhoods, key neighborhoods, but I also could have open house events where people could come and invite people. I could call the churches or call the sororities or fraternities or other people and say, hey, you're having an event. Can I come to that event? So there's ways that you kind of do those personal touches that may be more efficient than going door to door. But nothing beats one-on-one contact as much as you can, personal contact with people, to actually let them see it, not as politics, but see it as a personal connection, someone who really is going to better the community.
Very good. Thank you. So Tamika, and you can, I guess, speak to way back when you first ran for city council, as well as when you decided you wanted to seek the mayor's office. What steps did you take to run? Who did you talk to? How did you get that ball rolling initially?
Okay. So when I first ran, I'll do city council first. When I first ran for city council, my biggest group of folks were my parents and my pastor. And so those are the first people I went to just to make sure that I was going to have the family support that I needed. And then once I did that, then I just made a list and I started talking to everybody. So I started talking to, other pastors. I started talking to community organization presidents. I started talking to, the folks that I knew in the community. And I made a list of political folks. I reached out to current elected officials, previous elected officials who had run before, just to get advice. It doesn't mean that the advice, what works for them will work for you. So you don't have to take everybody's advice. And I honestly will tell you, don't take everybody's advice because you'll get conflicting advice from people. You got to do what works for you and what feels right in your heart. But get the advice from the different people. But I did all those things. And then I just felt like, from the day I decided to the election day, everything was constantly, I had to be out there touching as many people as possible. For the mayor's race, it wasn't vastly different. But it was again, at that point I was, married with kids. So the circle of family support was different. So I went and talked to them again, went to my pastor. And then I started just pulling together a team because that race was a little bit different the level of my campaigning and my team was a little bit different. But I will tell you, I'll share this in hindsight, we always kind of debrief and figure out, what worked, what didn't work. The mayor's race, if I had to do it all again, I probably would not take the advice of you need this professional political team. What worked for me five terms before was, folks that just I knew believed in me, people I knew I could trust, and we pulled together and we worked together really hard. For the mayor's race, everybody was like, oh, you need a professional team, you need this consultant, you need this person. And I had people local and even national that were working on my campaign. And I don't, I didn't get the result I needed, but I also don't feel like after looking at it, it wasn't even just about the result, but it was about the work that was done. I don't think that you always need that professional political team. I think you need to go with what works for you and what feels right in your heart. And there might be folks who might not be a professional political consultant, but they know the community really well. And those are some of the best people to have on your team.
Very good. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions coming from different locations and some people online about time. And we're going to delve into that a little bit more in the next session, but maybe just briefly, it seems like the busiest people are always the one who can find time to run for office. So how did you, again, just briefly, because like I said, we're going to drill down a little bit more, but, basically, how did you balance your time with your kids' activities, with your job? Did you reduce your hours at work? Kind of what percentage of your time were you able to leave work to do the public service that you've done? That sort of all of those sorts of questions.
So one thing for me, I do work for myself. So I set my own schedule. And so I know that's not always feasible for people who might work for someone else. So if you work for someone else, you have to have that conversation with your boss. You might need to decide what you need to do. When I first ran for office, 20 years ago, I didn't work for myself. And that's actually why I opened my own firm, is because I worked for someone else who said, well, you can't campaign on state time. I work for the state and we need you here. So I left. And so you have to figure out that as far as your work schedule, as far as the other things, you have to prioritize. You have to figure out what's worth your time and what is the most bang you get for your buck. So, I'm very family oriented. Of course, my kids always came first, but, I might be going to a kid's, soccer game, but while I'm at the soccer game, I'm talking to constituents. And so you figure out, how do you, I don't like to call it multitask, but you figure out how can you do something that actually pulls everything together. But my biggest thing is you need to let your priorities set your schedule. And once you know what your priorities are and what you need to do, then build your schedule around that. Was it a lot of sleepless nights? Absolutely. I was up till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes waking up at 4:30, 5 o'clock. And so you got to recognize that, you may not get the rest that you want, but it's going to take a lot of time, but it's worth it.
Very good. Well, and we'll let's take one more question and then we'll turn it over so that we can have some time for discussion. So again, not to drill down too much on it, but how did you raise $500,000? And I mean, we're not asking you to share any secrets, but just generally, you said that the mayoral race was more than you had ever raised before. And so what did you do differently, or what are some, little tidbits that you could share with women that are getting ready to take that journey?
So the one thing I did differently that I had never done before, and this is something that I would do again, is I actually hired a financial consultant, a fundraiser that helped me. And so they were y'all will probably hear people talk about call time. I honestly had never done call time in my 20 years before, but literally call time is when you have a list in front of you and you start and you say, I'm gonna spend these 2 hours, I'm going to spend these 4 hours just calling people, dialing for dollars. And on the higher level campaigns, that's necessary. You're going to have to do that. But that's how I did it. And I will have to say that you tap all your networks from when you were first born. So like, my godparents and people I went to school with when I was, in college, and, all those networks is really how you do that. So that's one of the things, but I would, if you're depending on, you have to do a budget, and depending on how much you're going to need to raise, you might need to have somebody who actually helps you. And financial consultants, what they'll do is they'll help you develop your list. In addition to that, they will also help you stay on task with those calls, and they'll do the follow-up so that you can continue to make more calls.
Very good. Thank you for that insight. Well, we are at 9:33, so I do want to leave time for discussion and in our local group or in our individual groups. Tamika, thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you again for, sharing your lessons learned from your long career in public service. Thank you for your service. And for making time, even while you're on a college visit, to reach out to women who are thinking about taking the next step in leadership. So we really appreciate you joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to the facilitators in each of the locations now, for y'all to take a look at your handouts and have some discussion. And then we'll come back in about 15 minutes. We'll all reconvene, and it looks like Ashley Peel has already joined us, and she is going to talk a lot more about how to manage your time. Basically, how can I make this work in my real life? So thanks again, Tamika. I hope you have a great college visit today, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Y'all have a great training, and reach out to me anytime you need it.
We appreciate it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it to the facilitators, and then we'll reconvene for our next session in about. All right, I'm going to welcome everyone back. If you can hear me, I'm going to give you just a second for everyone to come back together. I feel certain that you're not done discussing, because I know we were having a lively conversation here in Charleston. But if everybody will just kind of give me a thumbs up that we're ready, and I will quickly move us on to our next session. And I think this is going to be this is a lot of the questions that we had for Tamika, and a lot of the discussion that we're having here in Charleston really goes right along the lines of what Ashley is going to be able to talk to us about. So as I mentioned, Ashley Peel is here with us to present our next session. And we're going to talk about how is taking on a leadership role going to work in my real life. Your life is busy. We're all people who say yes to everything. And we a lot of times feel like we have to do it or it's not going to get done right. But what are you doing with your time? What are you doing with your money? How will this impact your job or your career? We already had questions about that for Tamika. And then what do you need to do yourself and what can you ask someone else to help you with, or lots of someone's else to help you with? So without further ado, I'm going to briefly introduce Ashley Peel. She was a candidate in this most recent election for the North Charleston School Board. She has run for office previously as well. So I'm going to turn it over to her, let her tell you a little bit more about herself. She is a mom, she is a wife. So she is right in the thick of all of this, and she's going to have some really sage things for all of us to take away. So Ashley, thank you for being here, and please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Perfect. Yeah, Sarah, it's so true. We all wear so many hats. We're doing so many things. Whenever we're tackling anything new, you really have to start thinking about, where is this going to fit? Where am I going to find time to do this new thing? And that's really what I want to talk to you all about this morning. Appreciate you all spending your Saturday learning a little bit more. It shows that you're engaged, you're willing to put yourself out there, and hopefully some of this information that helped me along the way will help you as you're kind of considering whether a new venture or potential run for office is right for you. As Sarah mentioned, I've run 2 campaigns. My first ever foray into politics was in 2019 when I decided to run for mayor of my hometown here in North Charleston. And then most recently in this election, this previous Tuesday, for the Charleston County School Board. So both of those races were different, but a lot of those same considerations went into play when thinking about, is it the right time? Is it the right race for me to lend myself and my skill sets to? And really just have a few considerations for you guys to be thinking about as you're potentially considering some of these same things. So we'll be talking really about 3 things as you think about any new venture. It's really about whether or not you have enough time to do it. How it's going to impact all of those hats and those responsibilities and those roles that we all play. And then can you financially afford to do it? And if you can kind of think about some of these things on the front end, it's really going to help in the back end, especially with some of just the stress. You don't want to just kind of pull the trigger, make a decision, and then end up down the road feeling like a little overwhelmed that, you hadn't thought about the fundraising aspect, or you hadn't thought about how this was going to impact, the volunteer work you were doing. So to start with the do you have time for this? I just want to share a little bit about my first run into office versus my second, because each of those considerations was a little bit different. I mean, we all have so much going on in our lives. In my first run for office, my wife was in the process of buying a business. So she's a dentist, and she was buying a dental practice. And we knew that was going to have impacts on our time. What was it going to be like to own a business? Little did we know that the pandemic was on the horizon, and it was going to take a lot more of our time than we anticipated. But that was a life event that we had on the horizon. We were also planning to start our family. Spoiler alert, I ended up running most of that campaign pregnant, but we were in the initial stages of planning for that, right? And so we knew that was going to have some kind of impact on our time, both during the pregnancy and then, if I were to win that seat with a new baby in the family. I had a promotion at work, so more responsibilities at the time, just spending more time at the office. I had a full-time job at the time. And then I was also engaging in programs like the Emerge program that kind of trains women to run for office, which, spending time just learning the skill sets that I was going to need to potentially run for office, whether it was for, that year or some future year. So I had all of those things in play when I was making that initial decision. And then even in this most current run, baby number 3 is on the way. So I knew I was going to be running this campaign pregnant again. I don't know why I do this to myself. It's just a theme now, running for office while pregnant. And I just left my job. So I left my job in April to be a stay-at-home mom, to, hopefully when baby number 3 comes, to just spend more time with my family. So the life circumstances were different, but things are changing, things are in flux all of the time, and just kind of really understanding, am I going to have enough time to do what I need to do to run this campaign? Am I going to have enough time to hold that seat if I were to win the campaign? So thinking about all of those things up front. Something that was helpful for me, and this picture of the 2 little ones that are here already. So was pregnant with Emmy here, our oldest, when I was running in 2019, my wife, and then our most recent Archer, who was born in February of this year. So we're gonna have 3 under 3. So send all of the good vibes our way come March when baby number 3 is due. But something that was helpful for me as I was thinking about the potential run was to understand where all my time was going at the current time. So, we all have a lot of different roles that we play in our lives. And so writing down each of those roles. So I'm a mom, I'm a spouse, I'm an employee at work. I do a lot of volunteer work in the community. I'm a board member, whatever those roles are for you, maybe you're an athlete, whatever those roles are, understanding each of those and visualizing them, and then jotting down just how much time you're spending in a given day or a given week to each of those activities. That's going to be a nice handy tool. And, don't spend hours or days on this, but if you can kind of spend a little bit of time jotting this down, it's going to help you understand how much time you're spending on those critical activities that you're going to need to continue to do, and how much time you're spending on things, like coming home after work, I need to decompress and watch a little Netflix, drink a little wine, do a little social media. How much time am I actually spending doing those things where I might be able to carve out some time to do other things? Or how many of those activities can I delegate to somebody else? There are going to be non-negotiables in your life. You might want to make sure that you're home in time for bedtime every night so you can say goodnight to your kids. But there might be some things that you don't mind handing off to somebody else, your tribe of people that are going to support you and help take on some of those tasks. And Sarah, I'm not monitoring the chat, so just stop me if we need to answer any questions along the way, and also keep me on a time task here as well.
Yeah, and Ashley, real quick, I will note that we just put it in the chat for the virtual folks, but I am going to provide a worksheet that's going to go out after this that is kind of just like an example of a way to track your time, to go through that and really look at how are you spending your time, categorizing that stuff. So that should be helpful. Thank you for touching on that.
Yeah. So I mentioned this in my lead in, talking a little bit about some of the life changes that were ahead. So it's one thing to map out where you're spending all of your current time, but it's another thing to think about where you're going to be potentially spending your future time, if you were to be running a campaign or potentially sitting in a new office or getting a new promotion in the future as well. And there are all kinds of things that might be going on in your lives. And I mentioned some of mine. This is our baby number 3, it's not pictured in the earlier one, so it can't be left out here. But you might be about to welcome a new baby to the family. You might be starting a new business or a new venture or a new job. You might be about to buy a new home and you have to deal with a move. There might be some health issues in the family that are going to take some of your time. You might be a mom of kids that are starting something new, a new sport, new travel soccer team. And just what are those things that you're about to engage in that are also going to be draining some of your time, and make sure that you're accounting for those as well. So again, just thinking about all of these things up front so that you're not stuck in a place after you've made a commitment to start something new where you're feeling extremely overwhelmed because you forgot how many, pots or irons you had in the fire. And the second thing on the time is just understanding how much time is going to be required by that new thing. All right, so I encourage you to think about this both during, let's say, a run for office, during the campaign, and after the campaign if you win. Okay, this was something that was different from my first run from my second run, right? The mayor of North Charleston seat was a full-time job, and I had a full-time job at the time. So I knew that if I were to win that seat, I would need to leave my current job. Whereas with the school board, it's a part-time job. So I knew that I would have to do that job on top of everything else I was doing, right? So understanding what the time requirements are going to be of whatever that new thing is. And we know that campaigns are going to take a lot of time. Kind of mapping that out once you've kind of done that activity to jot down where you're spending your time today and where those necessities are, where those things that you can't carve out time are, but where those adjustments can be made, and mapping that out on a daily and weekly schedule. So I knew for my first run, I had a full-time job. So 9 to 5, I was devoted to my work. So most of my campaigning had to be done in the morning. So doing a lot of my online work in the morning. And then a lot of my face-to-face, campaign canvassing, talking to voters in the evenings. I really crammed a lot into the weekends. Okay. So just understanding where that time for all of those new activities is going to be spent is going to be really helpful as well. Okay. Moving on from time. Actually, one last thing to put on this. Don't let time be the thing that stops you from doing that new thing or running for office. You can spend as little or as much time doing these things, and the victory isn't just putting yourself out there, right? So I know people that ran for office and spent very little time. They were really just a name on the ballot, and they won. their races. I know people that have spent a ton of time and have lost, and vice versa. You know, you're going to get out what you put in. So obviously, if you spend more time doing something, you know, more voter outreach, spending more time in the community, you're going to get more out of that. But there are small victories to be had, and potentially you could even win, even if you don't have all of the time. You know, if you don't have 40 hours a week to spend to a campaign, that's okay. Don't let that be the thing that's gonna stop you from making the decision to get out there. So how's this gonna work with all of the other hats that you're wearing in your life? And this is an important one, because anything new affects obviously you and your time, but it's going to affect, this has sort of a ripple effect, right, for all of the other things in your life as well. And so, you know, that same exercise that we talked about with the time, you're looking at each of those roles and understanding what are some of the impacts and constraints that a new venture, a new run for office is going to have. So, you know, as a family person, being a mom, being a spouse, knowing that I wouldn't be able to be there for every single milestone, every single activity. I'm not gonna be able to do every daycare pickup. And my spouse is gonna have to pick up a lot. You know, she's gonna have to carry the water where I'm, you know, now spending time doing something else. Having that conversation with my family and making sure that that was a group decision that we were making, knowing what those impacts were gonna be. But then again, those non-negotiables and making sure we map those out up front so that, you know, if I want to be home for bedtime every single night, that I know that up front so that I'm not feeling disappointed sometime down the line that, you know, I just haven't been spending enough time with my kids. As you're an employee potentially at your work, you might need to think about if you're allowed to run for office. So some companies might not allow a potential run for office while you're in employment. And if they do, you know, will you need any time off? Is that time off going to be paid time off, or is it going to be unpaid time off? If it's unpaid, you know, what are some of those financial impacts going to be to your family? And then, you know, how are you going to offset those if you need to when you're thinking about the budget? And we'll talk about that in a moment as well. I had my hands in a lot of different activities on the volunteer front, just working with different groups in my community, and also serving on the board of a local nonprofit. Thinking about that role as well. Is this work that I'm going to need to put on pause to re-engage later so that I can focus my attention on the campaign at hand? If it is something I want to, you know, I prioritize it, I want to jump back into it later, will I be able to engage again? You know, do I have to remove myself from my board position? And, you know, is it possible for me to rejoin sometime down the line? So understanding if there are concessions that need to be made in those roles. I knew as a friend, campaigns can be drawn out. You might be campaigning for 9 to 12 months. I didn't want my friendships to suffer. A lot of my friendships are long distance, so I have to make trips and have to travel to see them. So wanted to be thinking about before I ran, how will I continue to nurture my friendships, make a plan for that beforehand, again, just so I'm not feeling overwhelmed down the line that some things, you know, drop the ball or let some things in my life suffer. Okay. So this is really just about protecting your your priorities and planning a little bit up front about, you know, what the impacts of a run might be. When you think about concessions that you might be making in some of those areas, you might want to think about what the trade-offs are going to be, right? So maybe, you know, there's going to be a financial impact to a run for office. You have to take 2 weeks off of work and it's going to be unpaid as you lead up to the election so that you can, you know, do all of the activities that are going to be required of you. But if you were to win, this new role might pay more money, right? You might have a significant jump in future income by winning this campaign. Also think about some of those small wins. For each of my runs, I had small personal victories outside of just winning the race that would make running meaningful to me. So the campaign could be a stepping stone for a future opportunity. You know, I'm on the board of a local nonprofit right now, but I only got that position because I ran in 2019. I built a network of really great people, got my name out there, a little bit of recognition within my community, and somebody tapped me and said, you know, I think you would be a really good fit for this particular role. All right, so what kind of future opportunities might this campaign present to you if you were to run? And then lastly, I'll say, and this has definitely been true for me, the network that you build in your run is going to be an asset in the future. And it might be uncertain exactly how it's going to be an asset, but I can no doubt say that, you know, when I ran for mayor, it was a very bootstrap campaign. Everything was volunteer and DIY. My wife did a lot of my you know, she was my treasurer, my campaign finance person. part sounding board for every decision, campaign strategist, if you will. But a lot of great, smart individuals were attracted to my campaign in terms of, having great communications and PR skill sets, being great community activists or leaders within the community, and just being able to build that network by just putting yourself out there. You never know what kind of future opportunities will come your way. It's always important to continue to build the network. So, you might have to make some trade-offs, carve out some time, stop doing some things that you were doing before in some of your roles, but think about what those trade-offs might be if you were to put yourself out there, or if you were to be successful and win your race. All right. Last thing, can you afford to do this? The big money question. There are really three cost considerations for me, and these are really important to think about in the beginning of the campaign. And most commonly, we're going to think about the finances, right? How am I going to fund a campaign, or how am I going to fund a new venture? But probably even more important than that for me, the personal cost, right? Especially in partisan races where we know, there's a lot of divisiveness, there's going to be a mental and physical health impact of that run, of putting yourself out there. So be thinking about that at the forefront of your campaign, and what you're going to do to fill your own cup as you start kind of feeling a little bit drained mentally and physically with your campaign, making sure that that's a priority and that you're carving out time for those. The opportunity costs, because you're going to be spending a lot of time on this new venture, on this campaign, on this new job, whatever it might be, there are going to be things that you're not going to have time to do. So what are the opportunity costs? And I'll say for my family personally, we, at the beginning of this year, thought about buying a new house. It would have been in a different county, so I wouldn't have been able to run for the seat that I wanted to run for. So we decided to put that on hold. Let's run this race. Hopefully we will win. It's a 4-year term. We can always make that decision down the road. But it was something that we were going to need to put on the back burner. So an opportunity cost of this campaign that we needed to consider. Obviously, campaigns cost money, so there's a financial aspect to this. I think I overheard a little bit of this in the previous session. But knowing your budget, and there are tons of tools out there that can help you kind of understand where your finances are going today. But knowing how much you can personally afford to invest in a campaign is going to be really important, because the difference of that and however much you think it's going to cost to run a campaign is going to be your fundraising number, right? So, if you estimate that your campaign is going to cost, a certain amount of money, and it's much more than you're willing to personally invest, that difference then becomes your fundraising number. And I will say this, similar with time, don't let the fundraising piece be what stops you from running for office. Because again, I've seen campaigns run on very little funds and be successful. And I've seen campaigns run on a lot of money and be not successful. Something that will be important for you, though, is to separate out your nice to haves from your necessities. Now, this is referring specifically to campaign tactics. So you might say, I need to have yard signs. That's, just a necessity. I can't run my campaign without yard signs. But digital ads, if we have enough money for it at the end of the campaign, that would be great to have. If not, my campaign won't suffer if we don't end up doing it. And in my most recent campaign, this is definitely, we had a list of tactics that we wanted to pursue and how much we wanted to invest in each of those. And having that list was really helpful. So my campaign, we raised close to $20,000. We knew that yard signs, handouts, sort of physical palm cards, and door-to-door activity was the most important tactics that we wanted to invest in. We put most of our funds there. We said, hey, look, if at the tail end, we're able to raise enough funds, we want to do some get out the vote digital ads at the end, just do a big push, make sure people are getting out to the polls. We didn't hit that number, that nice to have number. So we did something a little bit more cost effective. We did, mass texts instead, rather than digital ads. But having that list to understand, look, these were our priorities. And if we don't get to these things, that's okay. It'd be great if we could, but that's going to help you with your finances as well. And then, campaigns cost money. You hate the idea of spending money, but think about the future opportunity for earnings if you were to win your race. Or again, if you were to leverage your network that you build, or the campaign as a stepping stone for whatever the next thing in your life is. what is the future earning opportunity for that? And can it offset some of those costs to make it worthwhile? There are a lot of resources out there about campaign finances, but again, don't let that be the thing that holds you back. You know, my first campaign, even though it was a much larger voter pool, you know, we raised less money than we did for the school board. You know, we got less votes. Again, this is another one of those, if you get out what you put in sort of things. But you can be successful and you can have those small victories, even if you're not raising, you know, six figure numbers. I really wish in campaigns and politics, especially, finances weren't such an important part of how you reach voters, but it really is. It's how you get out there. It's how you touch the community with your message. It's how you put your name out there. And unfortunately, there's going to be some aspect of fundraising that's going to be required with really any campaign.
Ashley, you were super thorough. Thank you so much for going through all of that. While we've got some questions coming in, if y'all want to put questions in the chat from all the locations, or if we have any virtual participants that want to enter any questions, I'll pass those along to Ashley in just a moment. I just wanted to ask you, so in terms of, you know, finding things that you can let go of, or finding things that you are, you know, steadfast that you're going to participate in, if it's putting your kids to bed, or I just wanted to see, was there something that you were really reluctant to let go of that you found it really worked out okay? Like someone else can do it as well as I can do it, or vice versa, you know, something, I think we like to be real about things, like something that you thought was okay to let go, but then you regretted later.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. And I think as women in general, we often want to do everything ourselves. You know, no one can do it as well as we can do it. And I think a good example of that for me is my participation on the board of a nonprofit, where I'm very active and I want to play a role in everything. You know, in as much as I can help move the needle or advance our goals, you know, I want to participate in that. So again, another one of those lot of irons in the fire situation. And sometimes it's difficult to let go. You worry if you stop participating in those things, they're either going to stop, they're going to fall apart, they're going to be done differently than you would do them. And, you know, there's going to be some conflict there. And, you know, our nonprofit has one major event, major fundraising event every year. It's in November at the same time as the election. So that's one of those irons that I had to pull out of the fire, right? I just couldn't invest the time that I wanted to. Had to let other people pick that iron back up, and we had a great successful event. So I think, you know, just really getting comfortable with the fact that there are smart individuals around you, that there are helpful people in your community and your network that can really jump in and fill those roles, and just, you know, tapping them on the shoulder, asking them for help, relying on them where you can is going to be hugely important.
Great, thank you. So one of the questions we have coming from Greenville is, and they're sort of twofold, what are some examples of online financial tools you used? And then hand in hand, what were some of the examples of the necessary costs? You outlined a few. Yard signs were necessary, like palm cards were necessary. But so yeah, examples of online financial tools, and then what you saw as necessary costs in your two campaigns.
Yep. Yeah, so most of our fundraising, I'll talk about my most recent campaign because we raised way more money this time than we did last time. But you know, ActBlue is a service that's kind of the transactional service that will collect those donations for you, make sure all of those required inputs, you know, the data like where are they employed, their address, those sorts of things are collected. Obviously, we use that, and that integrates into a lot of other tools pretty well. So MailChimp, in terms of direct outreach, was another digital tool that we use for fundraising that was quite effective. So making sure that we're asking directly of folks that they donate to the campaign. But I will tell you that the most effective way that we raised money was me picking up the phone and asking somebody. And that seems hard to do, especially in a time where I don't feel like many people use the phone that way anymore. You know, it's so much easier to send a text. But the response that you get is going to be very positive, especially if you're kind of building, like mapping out your network of all the people that are close to you, your friends, your family, and you're calling on each one of them. They're going to be so supportive. They're going to be more than willing to give. And it's really just about making the ask. And they would have never thought to give. Some of them, you know, you maybe have lost touch with, or they're not located locally the same place as you. But just asking them reminds them, hey, I have a friend that's running for this and I would love to support them. And I'd say we raised 75% of our funds that way, a little bit with the digital tools. The other piece was just networking with these different organizations that, you know, want to support your campaign as well. So not just individual donors, but, you know, groups of donors as well. I think the other question was the nice to haves from the necessities. I knew in the beginning of this campaign as well that I wanted to have staff. So my first campaign, it was very DIY. We didn't have any paid staff. I knew that to be successful in this next run, I was going to need a campaign strategist, somebody that really knew the area, knew the ways that would help us win an election, to help me make some of these decisions. You know, where do I prioritize my time? Where do I prioritize my money? And then a communications and PR person, somebody that could help me schedule news interviews, write op-eds for me, and do press releases whenever we did something major. Help me, you get a ton of questionnaires, help me proofread my questionnaires, make sure that my responses are delivering the message that I want to. So those were top of the list, on top of, those campaign tactics that you just have to have. And the top two for me were the door-to-door palm cards, being able to hand something physically to somebody that says, here's what we're all about, here's what we value. And then having those yard signs, which, I don't know how effective yard signs are, but it's apparently not.
Everybody does them though.
not a legitimate campaign if you don't have them, apparently. So we definitely wanted to have those as well.
Sure. Well, I'm going to field one more question, and then I do want to turn it over to the facilitators for discussion in each of the spots, and we're going to do a chat room for all of our virtual participants. So we have a question about being a single mom. So if you don't have like a spouse or that in-house support needed to move forward with running for office, like what are some suggestions? And here I do want to mention that, we don't have to talk just about running for office. There are lots of appointed opportunities. There are also opportunities to serve in your community in leadership roles in other ways or at work, until a time when you may be able to step into an elected office when you might be more ready later. So we don't want to discount. And we actually just talked here in Charleston that, the more local the service, the more you're touching people's lives every day. So don't feel like if you're a single mom and you can't, go for the state house in Columbia because you can't be gone 3 days during the week, you can still make a really big impact in a local office. So I would like to hear kind of your thoughts on and maybe some unique ways and places that you can find some support that is unexpected if you don't have a spouse that is able to help with some of those things.
I think this is a really unfortunate part of running for some offices that keeps women from putting themselves out there. Like you just mentioned, Sarah, for the state house, just like the time commitment. And if you are a single parent, you're either paying for childcare, and a lot of times that's unaffordable and not an option, or you feel like it just prohibits you from doing that particular thing. I will say, to Sarah's point, there are some offices that require a small amount of time per week. There are some offices where you get to decide how much time you want to put into them. Those would be good to consider if you feel like there are a lot of time constraints on the various roles that you have. And again, you can spend as much or as little time on an actual campaign as you can fit into your weeks. But don't let that hold you back from getting involved. One last thing I'll say on the childcare piece is, if you're raising funds and you're doing fundraising, those funds can be spent on childcare. Right. So if you're using campaign funds to pay your daycare, and this is true for both men and women running for office, you can pay for childcare during your campaign, during your stint in office. So I think it's an unfortunate reality. Just there aren't better childcare options for us. That's hopefully we get there at some point. But I would say consider where the offices that have the time commitments that can fit with your schedule are, and then consider if you could raise enough money to explore some childcare options that would allow you to do that.
Excellent. Well, Ashley, thank you. You've been super thorough. We really appreciate your insight from both of your campaigns. Those were two different experiences from you. And obviously you're in the thick of things with your kids, but personally you had different things going on. Professionally, you had different things going on. So I think it's been very, very helpful for us to have a picture of that. We really appreciate you taking your Saturday morning to be with us. And thank you again for being a supporter of women in leadership.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for attending. I love to see it. So, I hope that at some point there are just, a ton of women running for various offices or on different boards or pursuing whatever goals are in our lives. So thank you all for spending your Saturday learning a little bit more about my story and my experiences.
Yeah, very good. Well, let's turn it over to the facilitators. So y'all can continue to discuss for a few minutes, and then we'll reconvene in just a few with our next session. Thanks again. Have a great day, Ashley.
Thank you.
Without further ado, I do want to turn it over to Jessica Mackey. She's going to be our next presenter. And she's going to talk about why are you running or why are you seeking a leadership role? What are the issues you care about, the problems you want to solve? What are the changes that you demand, whether it's at your work, whether it's in your community? So Jessica is here with us, and Jessica serves on Richland County Council, District 9. She is another example of a very close race, a good example of how just a few votes can really make a big difference. So I'm going to let her talk a little bit more about herself and introduce herself, and then launch right into why are you running? And this is really intended if you do, whether you're going for a promotion at work or whether you are running for office, this is, what's going to sort of turn into your platform. Like, why are you the person for the job? What have you done? How have you shown up for the issues that you believe in? So Jessica, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica Mackey. I currently serve on, Richland County Council, and I currently serve as vice chair. And as Sarah mentioned briefly, this is my first time I ran for office, and I guess 2020 I ran for office, and it was a special election and very short race, and won by 46 votes. And so it was very tight, but it also was truly about, messaging. Is any race when you run is about messaging, but especially in mine, because it was a short period of time to really communicate to voters why I was running. And so in addition to also serving on Richland County Council, in my professional life, I work for MP Strategy, which is a strategic communications company. And so I kind of understand on both fronts, an elected piece, but also, in your own personal professional life, what communications and the value of communications and being able to articulate your why and to explain yourself, how it can help benefit you in both worlds. So in addition to that, I guess I'm an elected official, but I'm also married, and I have 2 young children. I have a 9-year-old and I have a 5-year-old. And so, as you all know, there are mothers in the room with young children. It can be a lot to do and manage it all. And so my son had me up last night at the hospital because we thought he had a really high fever. We thought maybe it was COVID or the flu, but it just turned out to be strep throat. But here I am, nonetheless, as I'm sure many of you experienced that as well, some type of mothering thing that you had to overcome to get here this morning. So thank you for being here. I've heard that you've had a lot of several great speakers before me. And so as we go into why am I running, I'm making sure, Sarah, there is a sheet that was passed out, a worksheet that they all should have access to. Is that correct?
Yeah. And we had not passed it out yet. We were going to hold it for the discussion period, but we can,
Okay.
if you want, I'll just go ahead and ask everyone to, if you're distributing worksheets in your location, if we can go ahead and get those out. That does have some really good questions to kind of prompt you in the process of thinking through why you're running. So we'll get those distributed right now. And Emily, if you could put that in the chat for our virtual participants, please, as well.
Awesome, thanks. And this is just to kind of help, as Sarah said, just to kind of prompt questions, but also as you go through, if you, it kind of helps to lead the discussion and frame it, but then also if you have questions at the end, maybe can help you to be more focused and specific. But ultimately, why are you running? We kind of think about it, we make the decision that we're going to run, and then figuring out what is that messaging to stand out that says, why me? Why should someone vote for me? What is my reasoning? Just besides, oh, I'm a nice person, we all have to figure out that reasoning of why. And it needs to be very specific. Using my race as an example, I really focused on, well, I'll say that it happened during the height of COVID. And so it was during a time we were all still at home. We, were quote unquote in lockdown, not going back to classes. Kids weren't going to school. We weren't back at work. Everyone's at home and watching the television, right? And we were at this point where we didn't have the vaccines yet. And as I thought about what is our community going to be like moving forward, many of us thought like, what's going to happen next? There's so much uncertainty of what to expect. And I thought about, well, what does this mean for myself? What does it mean for my children? And in Richland County, already county council was not operating, it was not operating well. It was quite dysfunctional with the members themselves on council, but also in administration and high turnover. There was concern about just taxes and just pure function of Richland County. And so knowing that, I was very concerned. I'm like, well, what if we're already not performing well? What's going to happen after COVID? How are we going to come out okay? What's going to happen to our children and families? And I decided, I said, I can't sit at home and talk about it anymore, complain about it. I really wanted to get involved and actually do something to help solve the problem. And I was very specific in looking at what could my messaging be to say why I felt as if I could help solve the problem. One of those things was my education and previous background experience. So looking at your education, what is it that you have actually been educated on, that you've researched, that you are trained, and that you truly know how to do? One of my is communications. A lot, and especially government, is that we're not communicating effectively to constituents, to residents. We're not explaining to them the programs that we have or how they can get access to these programs. So communication is one of my strong points, to say I have the education experience to help improve those things. But also, I had a master's in public administration. So I understood how you actually run a government and how to look at budgets and what does that mean. Because a budget in government is not always the same as a budget in a small business, but I understood that. And so definitely looking at your education, if you have a special skill set, if it's education, there's skill sets that you learn and how to communicate that you can bring to the table to show people why that would be of value. The other thing I looked at is involvement. What was my involvement in the community? And I served on many boards. A lot of my focus had been education, and really early childhood education, because I truly believe that if you could help impact children's lives, from birth to age 5, before they even got into public school, if we could help those children then, whether it be through good daycares or whether it's helping with their home environment, with parenting skills, that they could then be set up better in a kindergarten and then do well. So I volunteered a lot with nonprofits who focused on those needs. But then I also worked with nonprofits who women focused groups, who focused in professional development. And so young children and women issues were where I volunteered. And I made sure that I helped in many different areas, whether it was fundraising or just helping come up with policies. So think about the organizations that you are volunteering with and look at them and say, are they organizations that are only in one area? And is that area something that is going to be a crossover and benefit in your community and the area that you want to run for and improve? Think about your community and how you've been showing up for them and their needs. And some of this, we're all involved on social media. We have different platforms, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, and we tweet, and you may, make comments and reshare information, but, posting is not always you showing up and participating in an issue. How can you get outside of social media and really show up in the community, be involved, be present in community meetings, making sure that you are talking to, we would say, the experts in the area. We all know leaders in the community that really kind of serve as experts, whether it be in community mediation or youth groups. There's some person that's, already out there working. Have you reached out to them and understood their concerns and their needs? Even small business owners. How have you communicated with them and really understood their needs more than just posting your comments on Facebook? So making sure that you're present and that you understand the issues so that you can articulate why you may be the best person to solve them. We talk about getting actively involved. It's outside of nonprofits and your volunteerism and your education. There's the involvement in your community in general. So one, are you voting? Are you participating in elections and actually showing up to vote in every election, not just the big ones where we're talking about the presidential election, but even the local races that happen, and making sure you understand who's running. Have you actually volunteered and offered with your local voter registration office to see if you can maybe be a poll worker to understand the full process and what that means? Showing up at local meetings is also helpful in developing your messaging. I mentioned in my race, understanding that Richland County Council was dysfunctional. And that was because I had been to the meetings. I saw firsthand how they interacted with each other. And there were sometimes, of course, we're busy in the evening. We can't always, get downtown to the meetings, but I would log on and watch them online as well, just to see what was going on. Oftentimes we see reports in the news, and I'll tell you the news, they only have maybe a 30-second spot to cover something, and they cover a small percentage of it. And so I was curious to see, was that really true? The piece they were showing us, was that really the case? And so I started going to the meetings, and sure enough, that really was the case. They were not exaggerating or making it up. It was really true. It was happening. But being at the meetings also helped me to understand, that dynamic and see that, man, if the folks working together as council members, if they could actually get along better, if they could actually learn how to listen, then maybe they could find a compromise. And that wasn't happening with the folks that were currently on council. And so I knew that was one of my strong suits, was the ability to be able to work with many different people, through my professional job, through volunteering on many different boards. I've had the ability to be in many different circles with folks that maybe don't always agree with me, and learn how to work together. And that's something that Richland County needed. They needed to have council members who at least could figure out a way to work together. So go to your council meetings, see firsthand for yourself what's going on, and use that to help develop your messaging on what you could do and why you could improve things. Volunteer for other campaigns. I had volunteered for other women's campaigns before, as I mentioned, education of small children and women's issues, something that I was passionate about. So I found local races. I'm very passionate about local government and local races. I truly, truly believe that, you are the everyday person is most impacted by what happens on the local level. I know we care about our president, and we should, but locally, that is where you are truly most impacted day to day. When you talk about your trash collection, when you talk about what your tax rate is, like all of that is that local stuff. Whether or not local businesses are opening up in your neighborhood, your police safety, that is all local issues. And so I'm always been passionate about making sure that women could be represented on local issues, because women also bring a different perspective to issues than men do. And that's just naturally who we are. We understand issues in a different way than men do. We're able to multitask better than men, and we're able to come to solutions and compromise better than men. And so I've always been passionate about women being involved, especially in local politics. So volunteering in a local campaign also helped me. Working on women's campaigns and helping them to develop their messaging, helping kind of understand from the, when you're inside it and it's not you, it's different, right? Like you can take the time to understand, well, why something worked on social media or why it didn't. And you experience that knocking on doors to understand what folks want to hear and get that engagement. that helps you, it prepares you for when you really want to go out there. If you can volunteer on someone else's campaign, you get the feel of what it's like. It's almost like a test run before you have to go out there and do your own. Because imagine if you went out there and ran your own campaign and had never seen it before, right? It's like you never even got to do a practice test. So volunteering on a women's campaign and a local race is truly a good experience and practice test. And offer to help out in any area. Like find the area that you're good at, but then also say, hey, I would love to help you in an area that maybe you know nothing about. And maybe you just shadow someone and just offer that help. Many candidates are just so grateful to have volunteers. They will accept you volunteering in any area. And it gives you that additional experience that can help you for your campaign. Reaching out to your local representatives is always key, making that first connection and knowing who your representatives are on all levels, but also reaching out to them, talking to them about why they ran and what they're doing, what they see are issues can also help you kind of develop your issues as well. So get involved on all levels is really important as you work to develop your messaging. But after you get involved and after you kind of do all that research and you volunteer and you look at, okay, well, what is it? Why am I different? Why should I run? How do I articulate that? Make sure that you are being very specific, but then also not wordy, right? Like we don't want to consume, we just us in general, but also the public, we don't need to have to read a lot of information to understand your why. It really needs to be to the point and very direct and specific as to why. So when someone walks away, they know for sure you're running on 1, 2, 3 issues, right? This is why. Whether it is because, you understand because of your education, because you have been a community advocate for 10 years, fighting for, conservation issues, whatever it is, be very specific and direct and don't be wordy. And then once you figure out that why, make sure you share it and that you're telling everyone that you almost have an elevator speech, right? And this is similar to your campaign or your professional goals in life. Have an elevator speech about yourself. A 1 to 2 minute speech that if someone says, well, tell me why I should vote for you, you can run it off quickly. The same speech, you're consistent, you're not rambling, thinking, and going down these rabbit holes, telling stories that they don't care about, but really working on a 1 to 2 minute speech that you can share and that you can tell anybody, this is why they should want to work for you. And then if they need more information, as a candidate, you have a website. You can tell them to go to your website to get more information. As someone that's professional career, you have a resume or a LinkedIn page, right? Your LinkedIn page should be completely filled out. You should have a headshot and it should have all your professional experience. That is one thing I will say that since COVID, the engagement in LinkedIn has been through the roof. People are finding and engaging with folks in LinkedIn more than ever before. And so I would encourage anyone in the room, if you don't have a LinkedIn page, please go get a LinkedIn page, have a professional headshot, fill out your information. That really it speaks to who you are and what you stand for, and folks can find you and really get a good feel for who you are just off of that. So make sure that you're sharing with folks and that you are putting that message out there on a consistent basis. Consistency is key. And you can't think that if you said it one time just on your website or you said it one time on a Facebook post, that's enough. It really has to be repetitive, especially, in campaigns. Mailers are key. Phone banking is key, but hitting voters with the same message consistently with your direct message is going to be key. And so making sure that message that you created of your why is used everywhere. And even when you think you've done it enough, do it one more time because it's probably not enough. Sarah, I don't have my time on me. Where am I
Yeah,
at?
we're good. We're shifting a little bit. You're being gracious. We just were chatting away ourselves in the last couple discussion periods, so we did get a bit behind, but I think we're managing everything. But this is fantastic. I would love if there are questions from the locations to be able to let Jessica field a couple questions, and then we'll take a few more minutes of discussion. Um, yeah, excellent. Well, and Jessica, can you think of, I mean, when you were initially thinking about running, and I know that, with it being a special election, you didn't have, a year and a half to get ready. But was there something that was a particular key issue that you found, what, I haven't been showing up for this, even though I say that this is important to me. Maybe just like one specific example of something where you felt like you hadn't been showing up, and what did you do to address it to really make sure that you were in the trenches on it?
Yeah, and so you're right, Sarah. Initially, I will say I was someone that had always thought about running. Like I said to myself, "Oh yeah, I'll do that one day." Right? I had these young kids at that time. They were 6 and 3, and so I said to myself, "Oh, I want to run for elected office one day," but did not think that day would come so quickly. And so when it came, I had my education. I'm in communications now, but previously I worked for an engineering firm and I understood transportation projects, which is a huge issue in Richland County with transportation penny. And so that was one thing that I could pull from too to really show that I understood that and can work on it. The other thing that I heard was a big issue, like I said, we were in COVID, was small businesses and how they were being impacted. And that was one issue that honestly I didn't know a lot about, right? I hadn't worked in a small business. I'd been only in government and in large corporate companies. And so that was the one issue where I knew it was important because, especially because of where we were at COVID and what small businesses do for our economy, but I also didn't know enough. And so I did have to start reaching out to friends that I had to say, okay, what small business owner do you know? Who do you think would be willing to talk to me? And it started out with just calling a few friends, and they knew a friend that owned a restaurant. They knew somebody that owned a gas station. And so I just reached out to a few of them and started having conversations to educate myself on the issues that they felt they had as a small business owner in Richland County. And that helped me to also, one, show them that, look, I don't know it all, but I'm always going to be willing to talk to you, reach out. I'll be accessible. You can always contact me as well, and I'll do what I can to support you. And so that then turned into my messaging that I wanted to, really focus on helping small businesses through COVID, right? And helping them sustain and really be thriving businesses in Richland County.
So I think you answered it a little bit, but we do have a question from Columbia about how
Okay.
you chose your elevator speech and how did you sharpen it? And I know you said, like picking those 1, 2, 3 things, like people can't remember 25 things that you're passionate about. They can remember 3. So how did you, I mean, you said that, based on the feedback that you heard about COVID, that
Mhm.
small businesses was one of those things. How did you
Yes.
pick the other 2 that you felt like were the most important? And then how did you hone your message to, over time and make that better throughout your campaign?
Yeah. So small business was one. The other was the transportation penny program, which was a huge issue in Richland County. Many folks um, were just not happy with the progress of the penny, but also there had just been horrible media coverage of the management of the program and several lawsuits. And so I focused on improving that, but also my education tied into why I thought I could improve, right? And so the education that I had with, communications, working in government and my public administration background, I focus a lot on my pure experience and really showed that many of, the current folks that were there just had not had that type of experience. And so coming in, that I will be able to really hit the ground running on day one. And that's a lot of what I focus on, is that saying that because of my education experience, my learning curve would be shorter. I would be able to come in, get to work quickly for constituents, hit the ground running to help fix the issues that face small business owners and residents as it related to the transportation penny program.
Very good. Thank you. Well, I know that this is, I think, a really good, this session. I think there's going to be a lot of value in kind of talking through those issues with our groups in our local all of our different regional locations. So I'm going to turn it over to our facilitators, but first I want to thank you for sharing your experience, for sharing your Saturday morning with us. We really appreciate your support and your support of all these women that have joined us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate all that Will continues to do in the community. I think it's great that so many of you showed up today across the state. And I will put it out here that I am on social media. I have a website. You are more than welcome to reach out to me after this session, and I'm happy to always answer any questions and support women in South Carolina as they run.
Thank you. That network is a huge piece. I know, feeling like if you have a question, something that resonated, to be able to reach out and connect in that way. And I hope we're all doing that among each other in the rooms as well. But thank you again. I'm going to turn it to the facilitators, and we will come back together at about 11:10 for our final session, Skeletons in the Closet, the most salacious session of the day, I guess. But,
Yes.
all right. Thanks. And have a great discussion. And we'll see you all in about 15 minutes. Welcome back. If you are wrapping up your conversation, I hope it was lively. And we are running about 15 minutes behind, but we have Will Folks with us for the next presentation. I can still hear Charleston talking in the background, so I'm going to give them just a second to tie back in with us.
It's always Charleston.
I know, they're always causing problems, aren't they?
Always Charleston.
All righty, so I think Charleston should be joining us. Hope you had a good discussion. I'm really excited about this session. I think this is really an important thing for all of us to think about as you launch into whether you're going for a promotion or doing something, volunteering in your community for a leadership role, or running for office or going for elected office. We have Will Folks, and Will is the founding editor of Fitz News. And he was also the communications director for Governor Mark Sanford. And so he's going to talk with us today about the kinds of things that you need to be taking inventory of if you are thinking about putting yourself out there. And you're going to get some handouts at the end that'll have more information about how to kind of look into the public record and see what's out there about you, as well as auditing your online presence. But Will is going to talk more about some of his experiences in the governor's office. And then obviously from the media perspective, what kind of stuff are people looking for? What kind of stuff can come up that you need to be prepared for, that you need to be able to have a truthful and honest answer for? And what kind of things maybe in your past, if it does come to light, are a deal breaker for you? And really think through if there's something out there that you don't want to come up. You may need to think about if this is the right opportunity for you, but certainly at the very least, knowing how you're going to respond if it does come up. So Will, tell us more about yourself if you'd like to, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Awesome. And just bleep me or beat me if I'm talking too much or if I'm running over or anything, just let me know. But I am grateful to you guys for having me. Thank you very much, and really appreciate what you're doing. I think what we've been talking, or what you guys have been talking about earlier, is just how incredibly stressful life has become, how time has kind of vanished that we used to think we have. And so the fact that you're willing to take this time to explore these issues, I think says a lot about you. And I think it says a lot about our state being in a better position to maybe handle some of the problems we're facing if people like you are willing to make this kind of commitment. So thanks to all of you for being willing to make that kind of commitment. I did think it was funny when I was first asked about this. I think the topic was social media and how to avoid getting in trouble on social media. And I am literally the poster child in South Carolina for getting in trouble on social media. So I thought that was kind of funny. But I do appreciate the invite to talk about some of the things that you might want to think about as you're considering, again, some of these important decisions, because, you can't take them lightly in this environment that we're in. And certainly having been on both sides of this sort of new media world that we're in these days, I've got a little bit of experience, I guess, on some of the things you might want to look out for. I think the first and most important thing to keep in mind is that if you do everything right, if you don't make any mistakes, and if you don't give, I don't want to say opponents or enemies or anything like that, but if you don't give someone who is looking to keep you from doing what you want to do, if you don't give them any ammunition, guess what? Here's something to be ready for. They will probably still make something up. They will probably still conflate something, obfuscate something, distort something, or if that fails, just outright lie. That's one of the things in the political arena that is incredibly frustrating. And again, it's that old adage about a lie is halfway around the world before the truth puts its shoes on. That is accurate. And again, sometimes lies bigger, again, often the more believable. And so again, I know that a lot of us probably come from different ideological backgrounds, so I'll be very careful about any examples, but it really isn't isolated to one ideology or another, or one party to another. I mean, there's folks in both camps, both tribes, if you will, that are going to do this sort of thing. And I think that's one of the things I did want to speak briefly about. Since I've been involved in this industry, two things I've seen in the media environment. There is proliferation, number one, which is, when I was a kid, there were 3 networks and 1 or 2 newspapers, and that was basically it. And they sort of dictated the narratives. Today, obviously, you've got blogs, you've got new media sites, you've got, corporate media that's spun off into, podcast, and then you've got social. You've got some media who literally they exist solely on Facebook. I mean, that's it. They don't have a website or any other outlet. It's just a Facebook page. And so you've got all this media that wasn't here even when I started back in 2001 as the press secretary for Mark Sanford. By the way, I just want to point out, I was not with him on the Appalachian Trail. That was well after I'd left. So I was not on the Appalachian Trail, but that's the first thing. It's just, there's so much more of it, and it's coming from so many different directions that it's gotten incredibly difficult. I don't know if I could do the job I did 20 years ago as a press secretary to the governor. I don't know if I could do it now. I think it's gotten so much harder with, again, that just proliferation of media. But the second thing I want to talk about, and this is the disappointing thing, because I think the proliferation is good. I think it's good to have those voices, because I think the more voices, again, it's a marketplace of ideas. You go back to Oliver Wendell Holmes and his famous Supreme Court ruling back in 1919, and he talked about free trade and ideas. And so I think if we have that, and the internet has been great for that, I think that's a good thing. Again, the power of our thoughts to gain acceptance in the marketplace, that's a good thing. But the second dynamic I want to talk about is not a good thing, and that is the polarization. So again, you've got a lot more media, but it seems like they're being kind of magnetized again toward these poles. And here's the problem, and here's why it's something that you really need to think about if you're running, if you're looking at running, is because you have news outlets that literally exist not to inform, but to enrage, to upset, to get people ginned up. And I think the problem with that is that they just don't do it consistently. And again, I'm talking outlets on the left, outlets on the right, outlets at the national level, outlets at the local level. You've got a lot of folks that they're going to make a decision based on what team you're on. And if you're on the right team, sorry, I'm hit my mic. If you're on the right team, it could be the exact same thing, the exact same set of facts. But if you're on their team, oh, it's okay. We're not going to cover that. We're not going to talk about that, or we're going to put a good spin on it. But if you're on the wrong team, they'll crucify you. Again, exact same set of facts, but again, it's that polarization. And here's the thing to think about too. It's not just the media. Okay, if it's one little story, somebody can take that. And in South Carolina, the way the campaign finance laws work, I mean, it is the Wild West here. And so they can take something, again, some basis, in fact, maybe not, but they throw it on a mail piece 2 days before an election. What can you do? They throw it on robocalls a day before an election, on TV a day before an election. I mean, there's nothing you can do. And it's it's really difficult. And again, the sad thing is so often it's based on these polarized perspectives. And so again, that's why I'm telling you, even if you do everything right, you could still end up in a bad spot. A little bit of advice for dealing with a landscape like that. The first thing I always tell people, lean into it. Lean into it. Don't be afraid of it. And again, I'll be careful quoting politicians, but I do want to bring up one thing that I believe it was Bill Clinton liked to say, be strong and wrong. And again, say you'd rather be strong and wrong than meek and right, because people, let's say you run for office, let's say your campaign takes off, let's say that all of a sudden you become a threat to some people that don't want you to win, and so they start throwing these bombs at you. People are going to look at what you say in response, but they're also going to look at how are you standing, how are you speaking, what's your tone, all these things that you don't think about. So you could have an amazing response, but if you get up and deliver it and it's kind of meek or unconvincing or hesitant or whatever, you could have people that, even if it's a great response, they don't believe it, they don't buy it. But if you come out and again, lean into it, are very passionate, are very like, hey, listen, this isn't true. Let me tell you what is true. That kind of approach always does better. Again, because you're leaning into it. People are watching that body language very closely. The other thing I would say, and I always ask this, people always ask this, smile for mugshots. So many people forget this. If you ever do get in a situation, where you're incarcerated or you're, smile for the mugshot. Think of it like literally a political office shot or a shot at your business. If you got the dimples, flash them, because I'm serious. They will print it in the paper. And if you've got the deer in the headlights look, people just assume guilt. But if you're smiling like, hey, I'm not worried about it, nothing's wrong. Remember that. Smile for the mugshot. Another thing I would say, any interactions with law enforcement or with, folks that are, have body cams on. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Understood. Because so many people in these positions, whether it's, a candidate for, they'll say, hey, do you know who I am? Well, let me just tell you, that's the last thing you ever want to say. Do you know who I am? Those are words that should never come out, because a lot of folks say that, and then all of a sudden you get this video out there, and it looks terrible for you. One thing I do want to say about, because a lot of folks ask this about people's personal lives and kind of what's in and out. I would just tell you, I wouldn't worry too much about things in your personal life. And let me tell you why, because I think we've entered a climate where most media, and in fact, most people have kind of gotten to the point where they're past that. And again, South Carolina, certain parts of South Carolina are still very social conservative, and it can come into play, particularly in the upstate regions of South Carolina in some areas. But by and large, your personal life is not going to be where people go to look for throwing bombs at you. And so I would tell you that that's an area where, again, as long as it's not something that's incredibly hypocritical. For example, we have a rule at Fitz News, unless there's just something over the top hypocritical, like let's say you're a politician who has sponsored an anti-gay marriage bill, and then you're caught in a secret gay marriage. Well, we would probably write about that, okay? But again, beyond something that's just incredibly glaring like that, it's just not something we write about. And again, I don't think it's something most media outlets write about. So on your personal life, I mean, again, I think what people are going to look for is hypocrisy. And let me give you an example. We were just leading up to this election recently. We had a bunch of people who would send us pictures of candidates with paramours or with, whatever. And they would send us these pictures, and they're like, hey, you should run stories on this. And again, I'm always telling them, I'm like, look, unless it's spending tax money or some blatant hypocrisy, I'm just not going to write that. But there was somebody that had sent a video of, I think it was a person who was having an affair, but the video was of them in a car stealing someone else's parking spot. And we almost wrote about that because it was like, okay, it was sort of the combination of things. And so I think one of the things that if you're thinking about this stuff, again, it's that hypocrisy that is going to get you. It's not necessarily what you do, but if they can attach something bigger to it, like a theme. So again, with that video they sent us, it wasn't just that somebody was cheating or whatever, it's that they stole a parking spot from somebody while they were, so anyway, a lot of times press will, it's kind of like a scale. If they can dump one more thing on the scale to kind of push it over, then sometimes they'll write about it. But again, I don't think it's much in your personal life. I think people will just look for, again, something that's hypocritical. I think that's what people in the press, what they want to write about, because again, I think it's exposing something about the person that I think they think the public should know. And again, if views one side or the other, again, I don't think that's going to be where people look. They're just going to look at, are you consistent in your views? Number one. So that would be the biggest advice. Be consistent in your views, number one. And then number two, if you do get tripped up, if you do get in a situation, just remember, lean into it. And again, responding to it, be confident, don't let them see you sweat. Don't let them see you rattled. Own it, and own it aggressively. And again, like I said, lean into it, because again, I think people are going to be looking more at how you respond, or not, maybe not more, but they're going to be looking at as much as how you respond as the set of facts that they're dealing with. And with that, I'll shut up a little bit if people have got some questions. I'm sorry, I didn't say anything about what I did or who I was. I am the editor. Here it is, Fitz News. That's our site, if you haven't seen it. And again, before that, I spent 4 years as the press secretary to Mark Sanford, again, before the Appalachian Trail. Anybody got any questions or anything, or?
Will, thank you so much. Yeah, if we have any questions from the locations or from online, if y'all want to drop them in the chat, that would be great.
I didn't know there's a chat. Man, y'all got technology.
Yeah, I'll call them out to you if we get anything.
Okay, yeah, cool.
So Will, overall, kind of the way that you started things with, the proliferation of all of the media outlets, and that, to a certain extent, people are going to make things up, even if they don't have any dirt on them. Like, how do you encourage people to feel like, all right, like it's worth doing this, even despite those sort of circumstances?
Yeah, and one of the things somebody on my Twitter page the other day made a comment about how if you want to run for office, that in some cases that's a disqualifier. There's an old expression, every city council person looks in the mirror and sees a state representative. Every state representative looks in the mirror and sees a senator. Every state senator looks in the mirror and sees a governor. But I do think we need, and again, I deal with so many people in politics, and I got to say, I hate to say this, but 9 out of 10 are completely full of it 9 out of 10 times. And again, I hate saying that, because you want to have faith in this system, you want to have faith in these institutions, but particularly in this state, every day I cover it, I see more and more that there's just not a lot of good people in it. So the fact that you guys are thinking about it, please keep thinking about it, because we need good people. And again, the problem is you gotta, are you willing to have the thick skin? I'm seeing somebody is asking, what action can a candidate take if a news outlet is spreading false information? That's a good question. One thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with the press, 99 times out of 100, they didn't find this. Someone brought it to them. So it's not like the media person went out and, oh, I don't like you, I'm going to go find something about. No, we're so, particularly my outlet, we're so busy. Like, it's literally, we can't even get to all the stuff. So it's 99 times out of 100, someone brought it to us. But here's something to remember. If somebody has said something about you that is, again, a lot of people are going to be very careful. They're not going to just, most times they're not going to overtly lie. They're going to conflate whatever. But if they do cross that line, don't hesitate. Don't hesitate to immediately hire a lawyer and immediately file a suit. Because I'm telling you, when I'm covering stuff, let's say that I get a letter from a C&D letter, we call it cease and desist. If I get one of those, I pay attention. I think long and hard about, because again, that's, that says somebody is very serious about pushing back. And so again, don't necessarily advertise it. Don't, but don't hesitate to do that, because that sends a message to the media outlet. Hey, we're not playing around here. Not only is it not true, but if you keep saying it, we'll take you to court for our rights. And I'll give you an example. There was a story we're covering on this cheerleading scandal. I don't know if any of you followed it, but there's a massive sexual abuse, child sex abuse, sadly, scandal in the American cheerleading industry that my news outlet's been covering pretty extensively. And this is one of those things where you've got a multi-billion-dollar company that runs this industry, and they are being accused of being part of a conspiracy to suppress this scandal so they can keep making money. And I tell you what, they have hired a PR firm. They've hired a nationally renowned defamation lawyer, and it's the level of kind of pushback, that we haven't seen covering a story. Certainly, it's unique to my experience. But the one thing it's done is that it's compelled us to go to this company and say, okay, tell us every bit of your side of the story. So again, don't hesitate to push back. And again, part of that's being, that kind of aggressive response, because again, if you kind of lay back and hope it's going to go away, guess what? It's going to run over you. I hate to say it.
And Will, kind of along that note also, like, how do you prepare to address or be ready to answer for something that happened when you were younger, or that you did when you were younger? Like, knowing that it's out there, what do you do to prepare yourself if you know that it's going to come up, so that you can be ready?
Yeah, I mean, any preemptive explanation that you can have in your back pocket is obviously good.
And do you think it's good to preempt it, or is it good to wait until it comes up?
Well, again, that's the question. So much of it is strategy. I was just following an election in Colombia where attacks came in literally 48 hours before people went to the polls. What do you do about that? Of course, that's also a risk, because now with so many people doing early voting, I think we had 500,000 early voters in this last election. That's a huge chunk of the vote, So if you wait till the last minute, do you miss all those people who've already cast their ballots? But definitely be ready. If there is something that that could potentially be perceived in a certain way, whether it's from your youth or whether it's even something ongoing, that personal inventory is incredibly important. Somebody had asked, should you make a list of possible flaws? Yes. I mean, absolutely. Everybody who's running needs to do that, this column. What do we know? What do they know is what they call it in the business, And if you've got a good political strategist working with you, they will do this. And in fact, they'll probably do it before they agree to take on you as a candidate. They'll probably do some level of that kind of investigation ahead of time. That also reminds me, being able to trust not only the competency, but also just the, just finding someone who is good as a political strategist is so hard, because so many of these people are just, they don't care about the candidates, they care about the money. That is key, because if you've got a good person that you can trust that not only cares about you, but your issues, that's huge, because again, that's the kind of person you want in the bunker, in the trenches with you when the shots start being fired.
Do you, in terms of people going after family members, do you have any other thoughts about ways to shut that down? Is that a time when it's appropriate to say, no, I'm not talking about that. This is not about me. This is about someone else. What's your angle on that?
Well, the good news is if people are attacking your family members, there's a good chance that you are in a very strong position in a race. And that's another thing to remember. If you're being attacked, that's not a bad sign. Okay. If you're being attacked, that means you're doing something right. that means that your campaign has reached a level where, again, someone perceives it as a threat. Someone perceives it as something they need to take out. So again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but yeah, if people are going after your family members, that's probably a sign that you have really hit a nerve and are doing something right. But most people in this business view attacks on family members as a negative. And so, like, for example, if anyone's coming to me and saying, hey, should we hit the husband on this or the wife on that? I'm like, are you kidding me? No, that's going to backfire. That's going to upset people. And again, everything depends on the sets of facts that we're dealing with, but most times attacks on family members are only going to backfire. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And again, the beautiful part about being a candidate is you get to say up and say, look, I'm running, they're not running. Why are you attacking them? And usually
Right.
that helps push those attacks aside.
Gotcha. Well, and there is a question about Facebook in there, but I'm going to hold on that. You are getting an outline that is a handout that's a little bit more about inventorying your social media, your online presence. And there are going to be some tips in there that are going to recommend that you definitely need a public page and then a private page. But I think that, I mean, Will has touched on it already, that you still need to be careful what you say in private as well, because South Carolina is a very small place, and things that you say in private often don't stay in private for very long, or they don't stay in private once you have said them years ago, and then people decide that you're now a public personality. So still, obviously going back through what you have posted over the years and really editing and auditing what's in there. Does that still represent you? Is that still how you want people to see you? So yeah, please do, take the time to look through that outline. And that's probably great for the discussion as well. In terms of drilling down, because just like the proliferation of media, obviously the proliferation of social media has happened in the last 15 to 20 years as well. I think often there are it's a good way to get a message out to a lot of people, but in terms of sharing facts and information, sometimes not always the most accurate place for people to be getting their info. Yeah, do we have any other questions before we thank Will and head into discussion? Will, do you have any other parting thoughts?
Just one thing, anytime you're interacting with a member of the media, make sure you know their rules for the conversation, because you hear the words off the record a lot. And just a handy rule of advice when you're talking to a member of the media, and again, I go to great lengths to protect the people that give me information and to protect the conversations, because I want people to speak freely. Not all reporters do that. So if you are talking with a member of the press, a very good rule of thumb, you are never off the record. Never off the record. So just remember that when you're dealing with when you're dealing with these folks. But
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for what you do to share information and get things out to the public. We really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it to the facilitators. We've got some handouts that you can kind of hash on and have some discussions about possible concerns or courses of action there in your local groups. But again, thanks, Will. Thanks for being here.
thank y'all for having me.
Have a good one. All right, so we will give you guys about, another 15 minutes for discussion, and then we'll come back together just very briefly for a send off and get you all about your business for the rest of the day today. So facilitators, if you want to take it away, and Emily, if you want to drop our virtual participants into a room together, that would be fantastic. And we'll come back together. Why don't we say 11:50? So we'll do about 12 minutes of discussion and then wrap up real quickly. All right, everyone is back together again. So I'm going to provide just a few closing remarks. I hope you all got a group picture in all of your locations. It looked like Columbia was preparing for a picture. We got one here in Charleston. Hopefully Greenville has done the same. And again, I want to thank you for giving up time on your Saturday morning for this. We are so excited that this many women are thinking about taking the next step and into a leadership role, whatever that may be. If for right now that's at work for you, if it's an appointed office, if it's elected office, we are thrilled. And we want you to know that Women in Leadership is here for you throughout that process. So just a couple of kind of closing remarks and calls to action. We will be having a campaign training, a full day conference of campaign training for women in late February. We'll be announcing that date in just a couple of weeks. So stay tuned. That one is called Spring Training. We draw on the baseball theme for that, like we're getting ready for the campaign season. And then we'll also have a full day conference on appointed boards and commissions called Spring Board in May, and we'll be announcing that date really soon as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I will be sharing an email next week. We'll have a recording, which will be a replay of the sessions today. You'll receive all of the handouts. And then we'll also provide you links to resources that we have for female candidates and other leadership resources, links to opportunities to serve on boards and commissions in your local community, just other opportunities for you to get involved in leadership that we have mostly available on our website. And so one of the things that I really want to send you off with today is that it's not too early to start preparing for 2024. There are not a lot of seats, mostly just local offices that are going to be up for election in 2023. And this is a really good time for you to get your house in order, to get prepared, and to really be ready to run in 2024. We want to see 3 times as many women in elected and appointed office in 2024. And so we hope that you'll take advantages of opportunities that we are providing to get you ready, and also resources in the community as well. So we're here for you. Please be in touch if there are things that we can help you with, if you have questions. We hope that you'll join us at our subsequent trainings. And thank you. Thank you for getting ready to lead. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you sharing information with other women as well that you know that may be interested in getting involved. Women win at the same rate as men when they run. They just don't run as often. And so we need to let women know that we think that they're qualified, that we want them to step into service. And so we hope that you will choose to do so, and that you'll support other women around you that are doing so as well. If there are no further questions, we will let y'all go out and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. But thank you again. It's been a pleasure being with you. And we look forward to seeing you again soon at other training events in 2023.